The situation in the Middle East remains very tense. A peaceful settlement hangs in the balance, and with each new statement, there is a feeling that this hair is about to break. Are escalations possible? And why is Iran delaying the previously announced strike? Talk about all this today with Zvi Zilber, an Israeli journalist and editor-in-chief of Best Radio. Hello, Zvi.
Shalom, hello, glory to Ukraine. Greetings everyone.
Glory to the heroes. Thank you very much for joining this stream. Reuters writes a statement that, in fact, this possibility of a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip should allegedly deter Iran from attacking Israel. What do you think? I mean the containment of Iran, and the ceasefire in Gaza, on what conditions should it be?
Прекращение огня в Газе, на каких условиях оно должно быть?
A ceasefire in Gaza is what Iran is now extorting. This is such nuclear blackmail, and Iran sees how almost the entire Western world is trying to stop it and dissuade it from carrying out a strike. As for Israel, Iran is using this situation to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. It needs this in order to strategically preserve one of its tentacles, which is called Hamas. And it was at the behest of the liquidated Ismail Ghani that Hamas chose a course towards a strategic alliance with Iran and the Shiite axis of evil. Therefore, Iran is prepared not to retaliate against Israel based on its strategic interests, to preserve Hamas and to maintain the eternal threat that will come from Israel. Israel will now release the terrorists. Investments will be made to rebuild the Gaza Strip. Iran will begin to arm Hamas in a new way. And the next blow, you see. This strike, as you know, Hamas did not agree with Iran. It was such a false start, because Iran really had such plans to attack Israel on 7 fronts at once, but Hamas made a false start and therefore in many ways Iran's plans were thwarted. But maybe in the future, Iran reserves such an opportunity, and yes, you know, this is the state of constant war in which Israel has been living for 75 years, and we see that the radicals still do not give a chance for any kind of peaceful existence, and sir, yes, it means that we will have to continue fighting. But the problem, you see, is that the problem is that our government said after October 7th that this would not happen again. We are no longer going to put up with this. We will eliminate both the threat from the south and the threat from the north. No one will ever threaten us again. And it is clear that this can be achieved either by military means or by political means of some agreement, but so far we do not see such an agreement on the horizon. That is, if we assume that the ceasefire agreement does not include, say, some guarantees that Hamas will not arm itself, some guarantees that Hamas will not remain in power, some guarantees that Hezbollah will disarm and withdraw 10 kilometers from the Israeli border, then Israel, of course, can consider such a proposal. Well, this is purely empty bravado with weapons, that if there is no truce in Gaza, then we will strike at Israel. Well, I don't know. Many in Israel are already ready for this strike. They say that enough is enough. How long can we wait? Let's already let them strike. Let's already respond to them and put an end to the Islamic Republic once and for all. But Iran is now playing such a very interesting game, you know. The fact is that they now have a reformer president, a representative of the reform camp instead of the dead or liquidated Raisi. And he is playing such a game, such a course for negotiations with the West. He said, in particular, that it turns out that Gaza is not the most important for Iran, it is his son, by the way, who wrote on social networks that Iran has its own internal issues, hotter, more urgent, and it is not Palestine that is the most important problem for Iran. for which he immediately received what he deserved from the IRGC. But, nevertheless, we see how Zarif, the former Iranian foreign minister, also from the camp of reformers, who was under Rouhani, who is considered one of the fathers of this Iranian nuclear deal. He has also resigned. He does not want to be involved in the attack on Israel. And now we see that something is brewing there, and Iran is giving some signals that it is not interested in war. It does not want to confront the West at all, and that it should respond exclusively according to the concepts of the Middle East, according to the tomboyish concepts of the Middle East, which still lives by some principles of medieval barbarism. But, if Israel agrees to a ceasefire in Gaza, then Iran will be able to explain this to the Middle East, that they are so peace-loving that you can directly glorify how peace-loving they are and are ready not to respond to Israel for the elimination of Ismail Ghani in order to establish peace in Gaza. Well, in fact, for the sake of Hamas's survival. Therefore, there is no doubt that efforts will continue. And we can see that the Americans are also supporting their arguments with 4 aircraft carrier groups, and nuclear submarines with Tomahawks, and strategic aviation. In other words, they have practically brought a huge number of strategic forces to the Middle East, which indicates that if something happens, Iran can be hit very hard, including on its nuclear program and other facilities. Therefore, I think that this also works, of course. Well, the economic situation in Iran today is such that they understand that it would be better for them to get out from under the sanctions. Because the bags of gold that they receive from Russia are, of course, good, but there is nowhere to put this gold. But, nevertheless, they need dollars, they need foreign currency and foreign exchange funds in order to somehow support their economy, where a huge percentage of GDP goes to help all these terrorists throughout the Middle East, all these so-called proxies. Iran is thinking about how to use this situation to their advantage, perhaps by lifting sanctions, and Trump looms on the horizon. Iran is very wary of this prospect. As we know, Iran is even working on social networks against Trump and carrying out hacker attacks on his campaign headquarters. So it's not that simple there. It's a rather complicated game, a multi-move game. But the chances that something will happen, some kind of blow to Israel, are most likely limited. Most likely, it will be something similar to April 14th rocket and drone. I also believe that the probability that there will be no strike is about the same, and in the end, Iran will somehow get off this tree with the help of international efforts. Well, what CNN wrote, that Yahya Sinwar started talking about the fact that he is really ready for a truce, that is, what you said. And most importantly, Benjamin Netanyahu does not seem to mind concluding this truce, even despite how it affects his government coalition. CNN writes this, but against the Israeli establishment. In your opinion, who in Israel can really be against this deal? This is not really a truce, more of a deal. A deal is one of the main opportunities to return our hostages, at least partially. But no one is against the very idea of the deal. It all depends on the conditions. Israel has its own conditions and its own position, and Hamas has its own.
Но никто же не против сделки. Все зависит от того, на каких условиях. У Израиля есть свои условия, своя позиция, а у Хамаса есть своя позиция.
And the only difference is that all the other technical details, such as the approval of the list of terrorists to be released, the timing, the number of hostages in the first stage, and the terms of the negotiations, are all technical details that do not matter much. But the main detail that is still that denominator, division by zero, is that which is mutually exclusive. Israel wants to exchange hostages and then continue to fulfill the other two goals of this war, namely, the overthrow of Hamas, the destruction of Hamas and the elimination of the threat. Hamas wants the deal to lead to a permanent truce and begin the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. And, therefore, power in Hamas has been preserved. That is, well, imagine that this is just a different picture. Yes, Sinwar climbs out of the bunker with this rag and becomes the winner of the whole world. And the BBC, CNN, and all other Hamas-friendly media outlets around the world will try to do this. Therefore, such a scenario is unacceptable not only for Benjamin Netanyahu, but also for Israel. Understand? As far as I understand the situation, Israel is so erratic and ineffective in Gaza that it looks like they're just waving a stick in the water. There are two more terrorists here. A warehouse was blown up here. Another rocket launcher was found here. They found it here. They found it there. It's just flea fishing. It's endless. And I have the impression that what is happening now is the hunt for Sinwar, and Netanyahu needs this picture. If the deaf is eliminated, Ghani is eliminated, and now Sinwar disappears, it will indeed be a picture of victory, after which Netanyahu can go for a truce and a deal with a permanent truce, because it will be a picture of victory. And indeed, this is how it is all perceived in Israel. You know, it was a moral booster when they eliminated Deef, then Ghani, because everything here was already so depressed and depressing. But when we see the achievements of our special services, it really gives morale. Therefore, it seems to me that what is happening now is just a stupid hunt for Ghani and nothing more. Ghani, of course. Sorry, Sinwar. Ghani has already gone to the mountains, sorry, made a slip of the tongue. The hunt for Sinwar is underway. Sinwar, of course, is not satisfied with such an outcome of this war. First of all, he wants to live. Although he shouts that he is a shaheed, but in fact he wants to live. And he wants to come out victorious. He wants to be the hero of all terrorists around the world. Therefore, he will now say whatever he wants. Sinwar is a liar. There are such figures even in the camp of our enemies. We know that they must be listened to. For example, the General Secretary of Hezbollah doesn't give a shit. He won't just grind nonsense. That is, of course, he is engaged in propaganda, but you need to listen to what he says. You don't have to listen to Sinwar, it's a purely refined lie. And I will tell you more. Before the preparations for the attack on October 7th began, Sinwar suddenly began to give interviews to the Arab media, where he said that he was an old soldier and, of course, if necessary, he would take up arms again and fight for his people. But at the same time, we need to make peace, we need to build the future, develop economically, create jobs and so on. In which Israel believed with great willingness. We had a request for such a Hamas. Hamas, which wants to build Singapore in Gaza. On these. Well, listen, if they had originally wanted to build Singapore, with such huge money that poured into Palestinian refugees, they could have built a very much Singapore there a long time ago. But instead, they dug tunnels and built primitive rockets. This is what happened there. But Sinwar gave interviews in which he said that he was an old warrior, but he wanted peace and prosperity, the lifting of the blockade, agreements and Palestinian unity. Therefore, I would not listen to Sinwar. I hope that his days are already numbered, that his fate is sealed and that we will find him soon. And that will be the end of the war, the suffering of Israel will end, the suffering of the people of Gaza will stop, and this will be the picture that Benjamin Netanyahu wants. And then we will talk about the deal, about the release of the hostages. Maybe no deal will be needed at all, we'll see.
You started talking about the fact that Israel is in a zone of constant conflict, when there are some enemies on all sides. How do you think the conflict in the Middle East can be resolved, and can this tension come to naught?
You see, this conflict in the Middle East has such deep and long-standing roots in history that it is hard to believe that we will suddenly wake up and it will no longer exist. But if you imagine an imaginary Middle East, let's imagine that there is no Iranian regime, let's imagine that there is no Hamas. If there is no Iranian regime, then all these proxies, such as Hezbollah, also become less significant and innocuous. Yes, why not? In such a situation, I think we could agree with the Palestinians not on the creation of a state, but on some kind of self-government, and resolve issues with their rights while preserving the Jewish character of the State of Israel, without any population displacement and other unpleasant consequences. This conflict is being fueled artificially. I will tell you more. Palestinian identity, in fact, has no historical separateness. It was all invented at the Lubyanka. The Palestinians are absolutely no different from all the Arabs around us. They do not have their own dialect. They speak exactly like in Saudi Arabia. By the way, it is very close to literary Arabic. No cultural features, no cuisine of their own. So they came up with this Arafat, which Arafat wore. But this is absolutely artificial, precisely because Arafat wore it, and such a headdress was common in other countries. And, accordingly, I am not saying that this identification does not exist. Undoubtedly, it exists after so many years. It was created artificially, but now it exists, and this is a fact. But it was built precisely on sacrifice. That they are victims, everyone owes them, they are unhappy. They cry for the camera, women tear their hair out, children cry and wipe their blood. These are all the pictures on which the Palestinian people were created. They are victims for which the whole world collects money, which the whole world regrets. And the more victims there are, the better for this fundraising. And I don't know how to deal with it today. But in any case, a sovereign state, the creation of a sovereign Palestinian state, it is not some kind of ultimatum truth. Israel foolishly agreed to this in 1993 when it signed the Oslo Accords. But let someone answer the question of why the Palestinian people, who have just aspirations, believe that it is imperative for them to create their own independent state, which has never existed, just as the Palestinian people never existed. In short, the Palestinians called the Jews who lived in the British Mandate territory, which was called Palestine. And, accordingly, take, for example, the Kurds. Why don't the Kurds have the right to self-determination? A huge people, the largest in the Middle East, which does not have its own state and is dispersed on the territory of Turkey, Iran, Iraq and Syria. Why do the Kurds, who have their own language, their own religious texture, representatives of all religions, their own music, literature, cuisine, all the characteristics of a separate people, a separate nation, have aspirations to create their own state in the future and want to unite, while no one raises this issue or even stutters about creating a Kurdish state? And the Palestinians, who are absolutely no different from the surrounding Arabs, must certainly get their own state. That's absurd. And secondly, I don't understand that even if we are talking about some kind of Palestinian state, there is such a scale of all this that no one can even imagine. Because they usually draw such a large map of Israel. And if you ask people on the streets, they will say that this is some kind of giant country. Because, believe me, Israel, together with all the territories, has an area of 20,000 square kilometers. This is a microscopic territory, and the Palestinian state is supposed to be created on the territory of 6,000 square kilometers. That is just nonsense. There is simply nothing to talk about. From Jerusalem to Ramallah, which is now the capital of the Palestinian Authority, you can walk in 10 minutes. It's all very small, and I don't understand why. For example, a Jew by nationality can live in Kiev, in Hamburg, in New York, in Abu Dhabi, in Dubai. Why can Jews live in Berlin but can't live in Hebron? That is, a Palestinian state should be created after all Jews are deported from there to the last. Explain to me. I don't understand this logic. Why is it necessary to create a Palestinian state where there will not be a single Jew? That is, Judenfrei, like Hitler's, is completely free of Jews. The State of Israel, on the other hand, must be inhabited by everyone, not only the Arabs who have Israeli citizenship today, but also the refugees from all over the world who have been recorded and passed on as refugees for an infinite number of generations. That is, they have already recruited 6 million of them and demand that everyone get the right to return to the territory of Israel and certainly receive Israeli citizenship, which, of course, means that Israel is also turning into an Arab state. Such a Palestinian state, of course, will never exist. We are not going to commit collective suicide. Therefore, it is necessary to look for some new ways of settlement. New ways of settlement. To abandon the idea of resolving the Palestinian question within the framework of the creation of a new independent state. If a state is created as it was planned in Oslo and under the current conditions, with the existence of Hamas and the Iranian regime, it will undoubtedly become another terrorist cancer state with which Israel will wage constant and incessant wars. And everything that follows from this. But if we imagine the Middle East without the Iranian regime, without artificially escalating the conflict, without all these forces that siphon billions from the Palestinian problem, then I think we would find a solution to the problem. There are already Arab states that are ready to recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state and become an organic part of the Middle East. We see that more and more Arab countries are establishing good relations with Israel.
Органичной частью Ближнего Востока. Мы видим, что все больше и больше арабских стран устанавливают с Израилем отношения, причем хорошие отношения.
And this, in general, gives hope. If our relations with neighboring countries are normalized, except for Syria, where Putin's army is still located, we will be able to calmly sit down and discuss without fear for our existence. We absolutely do not want to occupy another people or dictate to them how to live. But this does not mean that we should create some kind of artificial, dwarf, non-viable state just because someone in the world today is trying to achieve it on principle.
Мы должны здесь создавать какое-то искусственное, карликовое, нежизнеспособное государство, просто и потому, что кто-то из принципа этого сегодня в мире добивается.
I would like to talk a little bit about the support that the United States is now providing to Israel. You started talking about the fact that very serious weapons have been brought up, including nuclear submarines. Why do you think Israel is now being given so much support from the United States to repel a possible Iranian attack, while Ukraine, despite its situation in the Kursk region, has not yet been provided with the long-range weapons needed to strike Russian territory, due to United States' fears of nuclear escalation?
Наши ВСУ сейчас находятся на территории Курской области. Украине до сих пор не дали обычную простую вещь, то есть бить дальнобойным оружием по территории России. Это то, что нам сейчас настолько необходимо. Потому что якобы Соединенные Штаты боятся эскалации ядерной.
You answered this question yourself. You know, if Ukraine had not agreed to sign the Budapest Memorandum and had kept nuclear weapons, do you think Putin would have attacked? No, of course, the same is Israel. Of course, Israel has never had nuclear weapons, but if necessary, it will use them. Moreover, the Americans brought one of their submarines, which is called Georgia. Yes, Israel has 7 of its own boats, with strategic missiles. So, you see, if we go back 50 years, there was the Yom Kippur War. Yom Kippur War. Yes, the attack on October 7th took place exactly the day after the date when we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the beginning of the Yom Kippur War. Exactly 50 years and 1 day later, yes, they attacked again. The Yom Kippur War was very difficult for Israel. Firstly, we were also taken by surprise then. Second, the Democratic administration, which was dominated by Henry Kissinger, who recently passed away, and the Democratic Party, which played its games with China and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Kissinger literally bargained with Golda Meir for every bullet. And suddenly, at some point, Kissinger comes out of the secret meeting and says that Israel will get everything it needs. America is literally opening an air bridge through which, thanks to absolutely incredible efforts, everything arrives in Israel, including planes, tanks and everything else on the list, and very, very quickly. And European countries, fearful of an Arab boycott, did not allow American planes to land for refueling, despite the fact that the Arab countries declared a boycott. The only exception was Portugal, which provided its outlying island territory for this purpose. So they gave them some kind of military airfield, where they refueled there and flew to Israel. And literally within a matter of days, Israel received all the weapons it needed in order to repel the attack of the Arab armies in Syria and Egypt. Well, in fact, it was a war with the Soviet Union. Syria and Egypt were armed to the teeth with the latest Soviet weapons. There was no need for anything. There were Soviet officers, Soviet instructors, Soviet pilots. It was actually a war with the Soviet Union, so it is clear that Israel itself got stuck. Well, here are the documents that leak from time to time. I advise you to listen to Mark Salonen. He has a whole series of videos recorded on his channel about the Yom Kippur War. And he also unearthed these documents, but they were also published in Israel. There is an assumption that Golda Meir said at this meeting that Israel has no other choice, and it will use nuclear weapons. And at that moment, the Americans, in order to prevent this, immediately gave everything that was necessary for victory. That, I think, is the whole difference. And apparently, Benjamin Netanyahu spoke frankly with representatives of the Democratic Party during his recent visit to the United States, since the Democrats, especially Biden, are the last to show any belligerence towards Iran. Biden was the first to immediately return to the Iran nuclear deal immediately after the inauguration. Immediately after the inauguration, literally the next day, negotiations with Iran began. Only the stubbornness of the Iranian Ayatollahs, their inertia and fanaticism prevented a return to the deal, although Biden lifted most of the sanctions. But today we see that Biden suddenly has some kind of super motivation, and he is sending huge forces to the Middle East to stop Iran. I think that, well, at least that's my explanation. I don't have any insider sources, but that's my guess. And you yourself said that if Ukraine had not signed the Budapest Memorandum and had not given up its nuclear weapons, it would now be safe. I am absolutely sure of this.
You know, there is still a question of some kind of global security architecture, because it turns out that all countries that do not have nuclear weapons, and there are quite a few of them, are in danger. And Ukraine is now fighting for its survival. Unfortunately, this is the case. Thank you very much for this conversation.
I would like to add just one word. Nuclear weapons are just strategic, that is, they are a theoretical threat, after the announcement of which, in general, everything should stop. This is what the UN was created for. But Putin let genie out of the bottle. And now, unfortunately, this rhetoric is gaining momentum. It is fueled by the indecisiveness of the same Democrats who, instead of declaring that in response to a nuclear strike by Russia, there will be a nuclear strike on Russia, talk about the use of only conventional weapons. And this, as it were, removes the issue of nuclear deterrence. There is no nuclear deterrence of Putin, because he is immediately promised that a retaliatory strike will be a conventional weapon. This is how it works.
Unfortunately, thank you very much for this conversation. Zvi Zilber, an Israeli journalist and editor-in-chief of Best Radio, was a guest on this stream.
Always glad. Take care.